Good evening and welcome everyone to the City of River Falls Municipal Utility Advisory Board meeting for Monday, July 17th, 2023. Lene, can we please have the roll?
Bartles,
Present.
Carroll,
Present.
Lick,
Present.
Klecker,
Present.
Toom, Wells Mangold.
Yep. Looking for approval of the minutes from the UAB meeting on June 19th. Can I get a motion?
I make a motion to approve.
Second.
Any discussion on those minutes? Just want to say thanks to everybody, even though I wasn't here, for reappointing me to the chair seats. So appreciate that. All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 All right, minutes are approved. This is a time for public comment. If anybody would like to come up and speak, please say your name, write your address down, all that fun stuff. Nope. All right. So moving on to the consent agenda and acknowledgement of the meeting from the West Central Wisconsin Biosolids Facility Commission meeting on June 15th, 2023. Motion.
I make a motion to approve.
Second.
Discussion on those. I actually had two things because it's just like my favorite part of the whole report. I noticed in there that it was talking about the high phosphorus content
Yes,
coming back, and there was concern. Can you talk a little bit about that, Kevin?
sure. So each individual community has to monitor the phosphorus levels going back into the river and treat those. Our phosphorus levels at our facility are just fine, but we take centrate back from West Central Biosolids, which comes from the 20 other communities. And there was some discussion about a few other communities that accept centrate that said they noticed they were getting high phosphorus in that centrate. And the question was asked to West Central, what are you doing about that? In which they said, nothing at this time, but we'll be monitoring it. Even to the point they said they might have to add some chemicals to try to reduce that phosphorus if it keeps up. But the concern was it may become problematic for communities taking back centrate. It was not an immediate alarm, but it was something to be aware of that could become a problem. So the discussion began to talk about what would we do if that kept up, and then also trying to find the source of that high phosphorus coming from some community, probably some business, but they were unaware of where that was coming from. And the communities all gave a shoulder shrug as well of, we don't know if it's for our community or not.
So it's not being tested before it goes there to see who the culprit might be?
No. But that was part of that discussion as well. And then I sat back in my chair and thought, well, another year and a half or 2 years and we will not be getting their centrate. So that, and another reason why I think it's good to be in the future drying our own product that we're going to be doing in the future. But there was no resolution on it, but there was about a 15-minute discussion on those high levels and what to do about it. And more monitoring was definitely going to be done in the short term. So.
And then the only other thing I had was that it was they had lawyers looking at the contract language.
Yes.
Are there other communities looking to do what we potentially did?
So in the meeting prior to that meeting where the note was in there about Randy Lindquist reviewing the West Central Biosolids contract with attorneys, Hudson and New Richmond were at the meeting and they both indicated they had their attorneys looking at the contract and the strength of that contract in case they did want to look at alternatives of trying to, do something with West Central. They didn't indicate they were going to. And then the rest of the board said, well, if that's happening, I said, the West Central, I think I said it, you better talk to our attorneys here at West Central as a member of that board and say, you have to better be confident in your contract. So then the rest of the board agreed that Randy should engage the attorneys to review the contract and see how strong the contract language really was at West Central. Just in case. I mean, you don't want to break in that dam, and that'd be devastating to that organization. But others, I think, through our meetings, that they have been since we are going to be doing our own thing, did not renew the contract. Others have been saying, hey, maybe we should do what River Falls did and also examine that possibility. So,
But we opted out prior to, without,
yes,
We
we
had
did
our
not
window.
renew. All the other communities renewed for the additional 20 years. We did not. So
Okay.
that's where that's at. So I think it's, I mean, if others are reviewing it at West Central, Biosolids better know how strong their contract language is. And that was my suggestion to Randy, and others agreed with that.
last question, I promise on this.
That's please.
Smaller communities, if they sit there and look at the language and determine that they don't need to stick around for that for whatever reason, right? If it's a smaller community, is there any chance that they don't want to build their own, but they know that we're building something, or maybe Hudson is building something, and then can they split between the two and contract with us?
They would all be looking at that. I can tell you that right now, there was a couple smaller communities in the audience last week. And I mean, there's no panic button, but they just went like, what would we do if 2 more communities left? What would we do? We could not afford this facility. So I'm sure they are not panicked, but of course that's way too strong a language, but there would be some serious concern from the remaining smaller communities who are bringing 1 load a week when we're bringing 7 loads a week. Some of the other smaller communities would definitely be a concern for them. And they would probably have to reach out to see what else they could do at that point. So for Randy Lindquist, who runs West Central, I'm sure he doesn't want to see that crack and that strength of that dam holding those companies there, holding those cities there, get any bigger, right? You want to keep that going. Because if all of a sudden you start losing a few, it has ramifications on the smaller communities that are involved in West Central Biosolids. So, again, the fact that we're going to be out of that, it feels pretty good because they could have some issues moving forward if others find a way to get out of it. Potentially.
I'm assuming it would be preferable not to have smaller cities like bringing their stuff here, because the whole point is for us to sort of maintain our own
Correct.
setup.
Yes, and I mean, one of our selling points is no trucks on the streets, right? Now we have 7 days a week, we have trucks going up and down our streets hauling liquid. And one of the selling points was, we won't have that anymore. So now if we allowed other communities to come in, now we're having trucks bring it to us. So it's just not, I don't think it's something we're looking to do. I think we would look for partners to do that in a pinch for somebody, but I don't think it's something we're actively looking to do at this time in River Falls. But that's what's going on at West Central.
Okay.
Good questions, though. And also, I was in the minutes too, but I'll just say it publicly. So they're at phase 0.05 for the 9.2 million, I think, whatever it is. When Hudson and Richmond were there that day 2 months ago, they said, we're not interested in phase 1 right now, that next $20 million phase. So they asked to have that put on hold until they figure out what's going on. So we'll see what happens there.
Those are fun meetings.
Yeah, kind of.
These for somebody. Any other discussion other than my discussion on that? All right. All those in favor of approving, please say aye.
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 All right. Moving on to the reports. Evan, it
Yeah.
looks like we have WPPI Energy providing some updates.
Yeah, so once in a while we have a WPPI rep. I think last time Tim Nodler was here and gave a little energy supply update. And today we have Jake Olkey, VP of Energy Services, here today to do your annual visit, Jake, and talk to us a little bit about WPPI and what's going on with Energy Services and how it relates to River Falls. Thanks, Jake.
Thank you for getting me on the agenda and giving me a little time here. This group, out of anyone, knows the relationship between the utility and WPPI Energy. In fact, in River Falls, you purchase somewhere in the range of $10 million worth of power and services from WPPI each year. But you're also a owner of WPPI Energy. So part of the engagement that we have each year is to try to get out and just make sure you have what you need. It's a big line item in your budgets, and we want to keep you apprised of what WPPI is doing and to support the joint action model and particularly River Falls. So I have a handful of slides here, maybe 20 minutes at the most, I think. Starting off just as a quick review, what WPPI Energy is. We refer to ourselves as a joint action agency, which is really a municipal company that's made up of a bunch of other municipal members. So we started off in 1980 with about 30 municipalities that were working together to take advantage of economies of scale when it comes to power supply and services. That has grown to 51 members now across 3 different states. We have a board of directors that's made up of 1 representative from each one of those communities. It's all an equal vote. There's no weighting or anything like that. In River Falls, as you're aware, Kevin is the director and Scott is the alternate. That group meets 3 times a year, and then there's a executive committee that's elected by that board to do monthly meetings and maintain operations of the organization. And Kevin is also on the executive committee. Besides that, just a bunch of numbers here. I think what's important is over time, the membership has built up assets of $750 million in power plants and transmission system, and our annual budget's a little over $500 million a year. So a little bit about me. I have been with WPPI Energy for 25 years now. I was actually looking forward to seeing Tim. I worked with him in the 1900s, I think, on some projects. So dating back a little bit. But I have enjoyed my time. I think a lot of employees at WPPI fall into that same camp. Like, I'm motivated by the concept of community and fighting for the underdog and bringing people together to accomplish things that they couldn't do on their own. And I think when you look at our mission and our vision, that's really what WPPI Energy is about. You know, we have some specific things that we're trying to do, but really trying to bring people together and in a way that helps them, helps the communities thrive. So in order to accomplish that mission and vision, we do every 5 years or so a member-focused business plan. So this is a process where we take a lot of input from all 51 members and try to determine where do we need to be as a system over the next 5 years, and what does each utility need from WPPI in order to be successful. So you can kind of boil it down to 3 key objectives that we have. Again, that generally refers back to the mission. We were formed to provide reliable, cost-effective, and responsible power supply. That's really the core of our business. But we also provide a lot of forward-looking services that are shared across the membership. And then we have an arm that does energy policy, trying to look out for what do our communities need from a regulatory standpoint in order to be successful. So there's a lot in that business plan. I want to say there's maybe 30 or 40 different initiatives we've laid out that will kind of happen in sequence over that 5-year period. But in 2023, the top priorities that we have first were around long-term resource planning. Everybody's talking about, you know, looking out into the future. So we're spending some time developing a model that will help us run some scenarios so you can see if we do this amount of renewables or this amount of purchase power or whatever, then we can model that and see, have a better understanding of how that's going to work long-term on the costs. So that's probably the top priority. Another top priority we have is around rooftop solar interconnections, and that maybe sounds a little funny now. I mean, the business is picking up. It's still fairly small, but I think when you look out at what we expect to see happening over the next 5 to 10 years, I think that you have a curve that's kind of like a hockey stick right now, and it's really going to start to take off. You have federal tax credits for that. There's the cost keeps coming down. You have aggressive sales organizations that are working to just get more and more of this out there. So what we're looking at is right now, if for instance, you're getting, say, 50 or 30 to 50 of these a year, that can be a lot. And somebody has to go through all the paperwork and make sure everything's in order. But if you start to raise up that curve and you're getting in 100 or 200 a year, that's going to start building up to a point where it's really hard to manage that on a manual basis. We looked at best practices across the membership, how each utility is managing it, and can other utilities learn from those either successes or mistakes. One of the things, maybe just to put it, make it a little bit more tangible for you, like when a customer puts solar on their rooftop, they enter into an agreement with the utility that kind of outlines terms by which they're going to maintain their system and operate it. The utility has to still maintain the grid, and so there's different interactions that may or may not take place, and that agreement sort of outlines that. If you've looked through there, there's some insurance requirements to make sure that if there was ever any liability from that system to the utility grid, that's covered by insurance. So as you have, let's say, over time, 500 in River Falls, eventually you're going to start having houses change ownership. And every time that happens, that agreement disappears. And now you still have that system there. So are you able to keep track of that without any, do we have a system in place where we have to go and get an agreement with that new owner? And so that's what we're looking at now, is just to make sure that there's a process in place that everything, all the things are taken care of that need to be taken care of. And then the last one is around organizational staff development, which doesn't necessarily directly impact members, but like any other business, we're dealing with a lot of upcoming retirements and people that have a lot of experience and tenure at WPPI. And so making sure we have some new talent in the pipeline, and we have a system in place to grow the leadership there. One of the hot topics is always around power costs. This chart is helpful to see kind of the last 5 years, and I'm sure you've had some discussions over the last year or two about cost increases. So in probably the summer, later in the year of 2021, natural gas prices started increasing, and then really went up in 2022. Natural gas tends to be that marginal power supply unit that sets the market price. So they stack all this up, and as the natural gas price goes up, then the price of energy on the market goes up. And so that's what happened last year, in addition to other expenses getting out of control. So it was a bit unexpected as it happened. Our costs were about 10% above budget in 2022. So going into the budget process for 2023, we tried to take a look at what was happening. Is there any indication that those costs are going to be coming down? And there really wasn't at the time we were doing the budget. So that's kind of what we planned for this year, is another 2022. Well, of course, as soon as we got into the new year, natural gas prices dropped down again. And so we're kind of back to where we were, meaning right now we're running about 10% under budget. So given that the way our system works, it's all kind of a pass-through. There's adjustments that happen. It doesn't throw any of the financing out of whack, other than it affects bills. It affects customer bills. So right now, 2023 is looking good, and we hope to see that those prices continue to stabilize. If you took this graph back, I guess maybe a bigger point to make is, if you take 2022 out and you look at kind of where our costs are at, they're actually lower than they were in 2012. So it's just an indication that the strategy that we've put in place really helps stabilize costs, and I'll get into that in just a minute here. So when you look at what we have in place for our resources, this is a nice chart to kind of show where we were in 2010 versus where we are in 2022. And I was talking about how we manage costs. Our strategy is really based around diversity. And there's a lot of different ways we can hit that diversity. But in this case, you can see kind of where we've moved to in 2022. We have about a third of our resources are owned by WPPI Energy and the membership. That's a way to kind of maintain control of that. Generally, those are partner projects where we have a larger utility that owns the majority of it, and then we can get a slice of that resource. So about a third owned, the rest is purchased. But then again, you can look at no single unit is accountable for more than 10% of our capacity. So that's important, because like last year, if we had a substantial amount of natural gas resources, we would have been way over the 10% mark. It would have been, probably bills could have been double at that point. So when you have the diversity where that's just a slice, and then you have some other fossil fuels, you have nuclear, you have renewables, and a bunch of things need to happen before you're way out of base. it's the same concept as when you're investing your retirement funds. So the other thing here that's important is, as we head into the future, we're trying to decrease our dependence on coal. I think that's kind of a general consensus on what all utilities are trying to work on, and you can see that that was accomplished over the last decade or so there. Maybe I should just point out, in case you're curious, there's two slices there. One is renewables, one's renewables, no RECs, or renewable energy certificates. So what that really means is to try to get out ahead of like what we're going to need in the future. The last two resources, in fact, that we've added to our portfolio have been renewable. But in terms of where we need to get to, the fact that it's renewable isn't as important as that diversity part of it. So in a short-term strategy, knowing that renewables are still a little bit more expensive to add into the system and they're not dispatchable, we can bring those in, but then sell off some of the RECs in the short term to other utilities that might need it. So it gets us that renewables for the long term, but it also generates some revenue in the short term. And then presumably there'll be a point at which that makes sense for us to have in our portfolio and we can pull those RECs back. This is just another way to look at that diversity. It kind of gives you an idea of the primary power supply resources in our portfolio. There's a diversity of location here. What doesn't show up on the map really is the transmission system, which is why the diversity is important. So most of the load for the WPPI system falls in the eastern part of Wisconsin, and you have lakes on the east side and the north side, so it limits the amount of import capability. There's only a couple of transmission lines that come from Minnesota and Illinois into Wisconsin. So having that diversity of location helps us get around some transmission constraints and also gives us transmission rights to be able to move some of that power into our load zones. Oops. I mentioned before about the long-term planning. So WPPI is currently targeting net zero carbon by 2050. I think that's on par with pretty much any utility that you see, major utility in the United States. Right now we're on track for about a 45% reduction in our carbon by 2025. And then we just kind of have this sequence that will go out over time. A lot of people will ask, can we expedite that process? And certainly you could. There's a lot of downsides to that. As I mentioned, one would be the cost. We have some embedded resources, so if you start adding more resources than we have space for, that adds to customer bills. Also, there's just the development of technology that we want to take advantage of. Really, to be realistic, this zero carbon by 2050 it's a steep climb, and I think we're kind of counting on some technologies that aren't quite commercial yet and may not even have been invented. But we have 27 years, so it's, I don't think there's a worry. It's just you want to roll into this in a way that's manageable. You can see that we've been active on the Wisconsin Governor's Task Force for Climate Change, just making sure that the steps that are in this process are reasonable and don't have detrimental impacts on customers as we roll into this carbon neutral world. I mentioned that the last two resources we added are renewables. So we have the Point Beach Solar Energy Center, which is kind of on the shore of Lake Michigan. That's the site of a nuclear plant that we also take some energy out of. We have 100 megawatts of solar there. And then there was a wind project in Illinois that we added about 3 years ago. Okay. On the topic of costs, I guess this is kind of a related financial note. We do take it very serious where our costs are at, and we're always looking for opportunities to make sure that we're managing our costs well. So this is an example of one project in 2023 that helped keep the costs low. We had an opportunity to refinance some bonds that were issued in 2013. As you might imagine, the last year or two haven't been the greatest opportunity to be looking at some of that refinancing, but we did explore it and we found some opportunity to reduce our costs here. So that just closed in April, and these bonds technically mature in 2037, so there's plenty of time left on those, but we ended up with a rate just under 3% that will result in about $1.7 million per year in reduction of debt service for our members. All right, so my last slide here, if you had a chance to take a look at our annual report that came out maybe a month or so ago, it has the same theme, this leading with purpose. And we think that's a good description of how WPPI and its all of its members are operating right now. I mean, you have an obligation to provide power in your community, but you're kind of taking it another step with this joint action and really looking at how do we do this in a way that helps our community thrive and working together with others to help their communities thrive. And so, you know, we appreciate all the work that you guys do for your community and the support for WPPI Energy. You know, our plan is to continue to try to do this leading with purpose. So with that, I guess if you have any questions that maybe came up along the way or thoughts about WPPI, I'd be glad to try to answer those now. Tim had all the questions, I thought.
Well, I can ask a question. Last summer, we had a lack of generation. We had discussions on this board meeting about, hey, what would we do? Should we run into a brownout, blackout type of situation? How would WPPI respond? Obviously, this summer we haven't had that heat, but there's other parts of the country that are experiencing crazy heat. How is that affecting our system? Is it at all affecting our system with what's available out in the marketplace?
Yeah, okay, good question. So there's a lot of different things we could talk about there. Going back to last year, I think there was a bit of hype in the news, and I think if you're familiar with the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, I'm not sure that they communicated the situation really well. I mean, conditions were tight. I think what we learned after the fact was last year, when you plan for capacity, it's an annual thing. So you basically, WPPI and its members are a summer peaking, which is your concern. So we have maybe about 200 megawatts additional load in the summer compared to the winter or the shoulder seasons. And so when you need that, you have to buy it for the whole year, right? And so with the resources that came into that auction last year, if there's a chance that they're going to be down for major maintenance more than, I think it's 31 days or something like that, they're not eligible for the auction. And I think what they learned afterwards were individually, nobody thought that there was a concern. So some major power plants were going to be down. So they weren't included in the summertime assessment because they usually go down in the fall or the spring. So when we got to the summer, it ended up there really wasn't, it was tight, but not as tight as what it was communicated. So that in itself was helpful. Coming into this year, there were some coal plant retirements that extended, and there was a bunch of new renewable capacity that was added. So it helped that situation a little bit. If you look at the MISO footprint, it goes all the way from Canada down into Texas. There is a point where that southern region has an interconnection, but generally what's happening there from a reliability doesn't affect up here too much. There is some back and forth that can happen in emergency situations, but what's happening down there won't probably affect like a day-to-day thing up in our area. As far as emergency response, so WPPI participates in quarterly drills that we do with the members to basically take a look at if this was happening today, what are we doing? And then we kind of go through, there's a whole sequence of steps on how we're going to try to maintain the system. We have about 65 megawatts of like interruptible load and emergency generators that customers have available to them. So that's like one step where it adds a little bit extra to the system. There's some steps that like there's like a public appeal, so customers start reducing their load a little bit by volunteering. And then like ultimately, if none of those steps happen and you still had a problem, that's when you'd get to like a outage situation. And that has never happened yet. it's, like I said, going back to like when I started at WPPI Energy, it was really tight, and we were running emergencies probably a half dozen times in the summer. And even at that, it just, there's enough there to try to recover the system before that goes down. So the drills have really been helping. I think what we found is if something pops up and we weren't drilling, you're kind of thinking it through on the spot, where the drills really help us make sure we know the sequence of events that happen, and questions come up along the way. We can answer those, so we're really prepared on those days. Does that answer your question?
Yes,
Sort
thank
of.
you.
Was that consistent with what Tim said last time, I hope? Or?
Pretty much. I just think it's, so you were talking about summer, and that's typically the time you would see these interruptible situations. Ironically, the only interruptible situation I can remember in my 10.5 years here was in wintertime,
Your time, yes.
when we had extreme cold spell situation, when the wind was shut down in North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa. And then
Yeah.
we had an interruptible situation in the middle of winter when we had to call to have.
Yeah. There was actually another sort of intermediate event right before Christmas this last year. But yeah, what Kevin's exactly right. And I think that's another one where I think the MISO footprint learned a lot from those winter conditions, because we were always preparing for the summer. And, I don't think that anybody realized that you could have a cold snap that covers almost the entire footprint, and that there's a drop-off point where wind turbines shut off because they're trying to protect themselves, and solar inverters shut off. So all of that was sort of planned into the generation forecast, and then all of a sudden, just like that, like the whole region dropped by all that generation, and that was something that they weren't prepared for at that day. But going forward, that will never happen again. So.
It was just a side note on that too. So we don't have any in River Falls, but there are many customers in the WPPI system that has what is called an interruptible rate. So they sign up for a rate that's a little better rate, but they could be called to shut down. Was it 2 hours they have?
Yep.
Is it? So they have to shut their whole process down within 2 hours on the interruptible rate. And then in the middle of winter, we call them to interrupt and shut down within 2 hours. And of course, many of them go, well, what rate? What are you talking about? Because it's been so long, right? The new facilities manager wasn't up to date. And 2 hours is a pretty aggressive time span for a lot of these large manufacturers to shut down. And if they don't make it, there's a pretty stiff penalty involved with that. And I think most of them made it, 80%.
It was another learning experience.
Yeah. And that whole communication process and having people understand the rate, prepared for that situation, to have their own plan in place as well. So yeah, more learning going on there.
That's right. And I think I didn't really mention it before, but there is a fair amount of transmission construction still going on, which is another sort of planning mechanism to try to make sure that we have more access wherever we need it to deliver power. So.
I had a really quick question. You wanted to get to net zero carbon by 2050, so 26 years and change. But looking at the 2022 fuel mix, with gas and coal, we're sitting at about 53%, so well over half still. What is the plan, or the general plan, to get rid of those areas?
So we have two coal resources, one being the Boswell plant. I can go back to Boswell up in upper Minnesota. That was actually the very first resource that WPPI acquired. And then there's Elm Road, which is down just south of Milwaukee. And so the major owner, We Energies, owns the Elm Road plant, and they've already announced that they're planning to convert that to natural gas by the early 2030s, I think it is. So that there's some, newer gas plants will be pretty clean. It's still dispatchable to fill in the gaps with, natural gas is probably going to be needed during this this time period building up to 2050, and it may be needed beyond that, where then it's, you have to sequester emissions and things like that.
With natural gas, though, that's the stuff that can set the market. So if it goes up, then it gets more expensive for everybody else versus the other stuff, which isn't as expensive.
That's exactly right.
is why, I guess, why natural gas then, when it could raise everybody's rates versus something else that they could be investing in to switch over to?
Well, gas emissions, carbon emissions are significantly less than the coal plants. But it kind of goes back to what I was saying, why this is sort of a deliberate long-term. It's not something we can really do by, the next 3 or 4 years because, solar, like today, it was partly cloudy. I bet if we looked at the graphs, you had a couple of hours where it was really producing, a couple where it was almost doing nothing. And so you still need some dispatchable resources in there to manage that.
Sure.
It's, I don't know if I really have an answer. I think that this is evolving and, where that natural gas price goes and how we manage that in the portfolio will be important.
I know it's starting to dabble with batteries as well. I mean, we're starting to see a few of those pop up now when they become a little more cost effective. When the renewables can then charge the batteries, I think, in 25 years, that may be another avenue for some of this potentially. Again, I think a lot of it hasn't even been thought of yet. 27 years, that if you go backwards, that's about the time the internet started. So yeah, there's a lot of questions, but affordability, Kellen, that's still on the forefront. Reliability still has to be on the forefront, right? I mean, those are two big pieces of the equation while still trying to reach those goals, and I think there are some questions yet.
Next year's update.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jake.
Next report is U.S. Army Corps of Engineers project report and KCC update.
Good evening.
Amy, thanks for coming tonight.
Yes.
Amy and Steve Goff are here to talk a little bit about Army Corps and KCC and projects and studies.
Yes, and I do
Thank
think
you,
that
Amy.
the third time is the charm because Steve is in the house. I've got your slide at the end, so yeah, get there. So, so we've got some updates since we were here last fall to provide you. I'm gonna start out just a bit to provide the project updates, and we've got some information that's pretty timely because we just had a meeting last week with the Army Corps, an internal team kickoff meeting. So I'll be providing you information on that. And then I've got a slide for Steve at the end to give you some updates on KCC as well. So what I'm talking about for the most part is pretty much draft information that was provided at the meeting last week. And we as city team and USACE team talked about this information, but I just want to give you the qualifier at the beginning that I expect things to be refined and changed from here. I just want to be able to give you insight into what we're talking about and where we think things are going to be going over the next year. So we laid out some primary objectives, discussed them. You can see them here. The primary ones to restore the hydrothermal dynamics and to increase the natural habitat. And then the secondary ones, increasing habitat, increasing species diversity, and increasing upstream connectivity. So just a couple items to note that I picked up on as we were listening to the Corps talk about things and some key items. So I hadn't heard this before, or else if I did, I forgot, but it was pretty key that no more than 10% of the federal share can be attributed to recreation in a CAP 206 project. So I guess I knew that recreation was pretty much off the board from a CAP 206 project, but 10% can get filtered in. I think we're going to have to think about that as we build out the project because we're at that 15 million cap and we've got lots of stuff to do potentially that's going to cost some dollars. So piece on that. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is we did talk stormwater. So if you remember, we've got the outfalls coming from the downtown into the system. We talked about that. The Corps is well aware of it and they are still thinking and discussing amongst themselves how that might work. As they've went back and started digging through all of our reports and all of our studies and all of our history, they're learning a whole lot as well. One of the discussions that came up at the meeting was that we've got a whole lot of sand in the Kinney, and sand is an excellent filtration system for stormwater. So I think they're trying to figure out how they can help us alleviate some of that stormwater issue that we have. We may not be able to do it all within the CAP 206 project, but that's still something that we're talking about. So,
I mean, yeah, that's the piece we keep bringing up, Amy, right? I mean, this is an environmental project to make the river cooler, better, more environmentally friendly. And then we say, oh, by the way, we still have 20 some outfalls coming into the river off the downtown streets. And we feel there's a good nexus between cleaning up the river and cleaning up our stormwater processes, which they, I think, agree with quietly, but yet it doesn't fit neatly into their 206 project. And start just trying to be creative to find a way, I think. Is that?
yeah,
assessment?
and I think, I mean, if we started talking about it back to the hydrothermal dynamics and tying it there, because if we've got hot water coming in from those stormwater outfalls, that's going against a primary objective. So they're seeing how they can tie it. Again, I think it's weighing the objectives against the process cost and constraints as we build out the project and see where we can go.
Do the
Yeah.
reports, Amy, show that the water from those outfalls are significantly higher in temperature, I guess?
I'd have to look, I don't know the reports the top of my head, but I
You haven't
think
memorized them by now?
I
Come
can
on.
confidently say that at least for 6 months out of the year, the temperature coming off of is because it's completely untreated from the downtown.
Right.
So it's just running right off that blacktop. So
Yeah, warm summer rain off of hot streets.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we talked quite a bit about ecological modeling. So the CAP 206 program is going to be based off habitat benefits that are assigned to the project, right? So the Corps comes in, they have to be able to say, if we're going to do this project and it's going to receive federal funding, what is the benefit to US citizens for that? And the way they do that within this program is through habitat benefits. So that's how they kind of get to that cost benefit analysis, right? So they went into great detail about how this is done and the models that all the data is put into and the outputs. But basically what they do is they find wildlife species that represent habitat and modeling that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife have built out many years ago. So they can use those, put those into the model and see habitat benefits per unit, and then we can calculate those. Rudimentary explanation, but that's kind of how it works. They're also looking at it over, so the project would be over a 50-year lifespan. So that's what they're anticipating. If they come in and do the work, that it would last 50 years. And that's kind of part of that cost benefit piece. And the habitat restoration types that they're talking about are 3: stream, forest, and marsh, which was an interesting conversation. I think coming out of the Kinney Corridor Plan, obviously river stream, right? I envisioned, I think, more marsh just because of the open space from the lakes, in my mind, equated to marsh. They are seeing much more forest, so much more planting in the Lake Jordan, Lake Louise areas should the dams come out to provide a more forested system.
Yeah, shade for the river as well as what they had indicated. right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, so in addition to all of that, the team really talked about lots of the history and the project details, making sure that the full team, so we've got new staff on the city team, and obviously making sure that the core team was up to speed as well on where the project's been and where we've come from. We talked quite a bit about opportunities and constraints of the project and kind of put some parameters on it, and we talked about public participation as well. So I've got a few slides next about potential process, where we're headed over the next year, so I can give you a few details. So right now, well, 2 months ago, the Corps was telling us they were foreseeing a 14-month project. So this, I will tell you, is cut down fairly significantly from their normal process. They are trying really hard to develop a new system so that they can get us done fast. It's not just us, but it's even within the Corps. They know they take too much time at times, so they're trying to be efficient. So 14 months, say from May, right? So when they started before June and May even, they started reviewing our studies and our data, formulating alternatives. They were out here last month, I think June, they were collecting river data that they knew they needed yet, outlining the work plan, the timeline, talking to the other agencies, whether that's SHPO for the historical analysis or the DNR even, to make sure that those agencies are coordinating. And then working on that conceptual ecological model based on what we talked about on the last slide. So I'll tell you, formulating alternatives, right now we have 4. No action, nothing happens. Powell out, Junction stays, Junction out, Powell stays, or both out. Those are the 4 on the table at this point. We talked about it as a team, couldn't come up with any others. So I think that's where we're going to land, unless in the next month or so something else comes up. So,
Then each of those 4 will be scored in their ecological model.
correct.
And then a recommendation will be put forward next summer.
We should have that by October, I believe. We will have the tentatively selected
Of this year.
plan this year.
Well, there.
So I'll talk to you about that as I go. So July through September, right? So we just had our team kickoff meeting. We're planning for a public outreach meeting on August 10th. That's a tentative date. I'm looking for a location, but that's what we talked about. They are working on refining criteria for the tentatively selected plan. So that's the TSP. If you hear TSP, tentatively selected plan. And they are in process of identifying through those ecological models that TSP, okay? So if we punch ahead, June to October, this is a long span. We are planning to get, I believe, the TSP, their preferred alternative, in October. And then it starts a whole slew of review. So we'll have the draft report, we'll have the direction they think they want to head, and then the Corps and agency partners will take months to review, right? And during that time, we're going to review. We're probably going to have some public input for review, right? So that's what's happening all during that time. And then we hit July with a final feasibility report. And at that point, I would assume, depending on the recommendation, it could come back to UAB, ultimately council, for where we're headed. So, just want a few other updates. So at this point, I'm going to be speaking to Rotary and a few other interested groups kind of about the process to just start letting the community know more and getting folks up to speed about the next year, right? Wanted to let you know that we have done website updates on kinneycorridor.org, so you can definitely go and check out current information on that website as well. I will pause and see if you have any questions for me on process or the project that I might be able to answer before I turn it over to Steve.
In regards to the cost of the study itself, I know we were kicking around 750,000. Is that still where it is?
That is still where it is.
Okay, and we
Yes.
had the funding partner with the KCC. Everything's all good there? Everything's on time money-wise?
Yes, so we did do our initial payment to the Corps, and now I think we did 50,000 apiece. Yep, I'm getting a nod. So we did 50,000, KCC did 50,000, the Corps has their first 100. And what happens is they work through those funds, and as they then need more, they'll tell us and we'll split it 50-50 and submit to them.
When do we anticipate needing another 100,000?
Yeah, we kind of asked them that. And they said, well, we'll let you know.
Reassuring.
So, but Steve has updates on that side as well too, so.
In October, is that, if there's the draft, recommendations or whatever it might be, the draft plan, is that when we have a better picture of what this will actually cost the city and the ratepayers and everybody else? And will
Yes.
that expense be, will the expenses be shown over plan 1, 2, 3, and 4 to provide the full picture and for full transparency for everybody?
That's a good question. Based on the documents I've seen so far, I would anticipate that would be yes.
Okay.
Because they're going to run through each scenario. They're going to have that data in order to compare the four and make a recommendation.
Sure.
So, yeah.
I just didn't know how much it was being shared with the public. Like, this is really the true cost. Like, it's great that we have the Army Corps and they're going to kick in whatever they kick in, but everyone needs to know that we're still on the hook for like millions and millions of dollars for this.
Yeah.
And we're all going to pay for it in one way or another. So just making sure that everyone's really aware of that.
Yep. So, to that, I will say we have a funding partner. We have the Corps. We have the DNR on board, which their status just changed, and it went from
1 to
1 to 2
2.
per dam, potentially. So we were expecting 1 for each dam.
Now we're hoping 2 for each dam.
hoping 2 for each dam.
Can we get that up to 3?
Can we what?
Can we get it up to 3?
You're right. I don't know. We just got 2. Slowly, incremental.
So, and I don't know, Kevin, if you've talked with UAB about Merchant McIntyre at all?
No, not really. I just know that the focus of Merck and McIntyre, I think, kind of came off utility stuff, but I don't know if they're maybe focusing a little bit more on some of the river restoration things. I don't know that.
We
So you help
do
me with
have
that.
them on that
Go.
project. So we have hired an organization out of Washington, D.C. called Merchant McIntyre, and they are assisting us in getting funding from federal and other sources on a number of different projects, but we've set up priorities for them to assist us with, and the Kinney Corridor project is one of them. So we're hoping that they will also be able to bring dollars in as well.
What's their fee to retain them?
Oh, boy. You're pushing our limit tonight.
I want to say it's
$80,000 and $100,000 for 1 year,
And that's,
potentially.
and Chris, that's not utility money.
Oh, it's taxpayer money. So what do
Josh,
we?
correct me if I'm wrong, and then is there a portion of that? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think ultimately it's going to depend on the variety of funding that they are able to secure for us before we determine exactly how we want to allocate their cost out. As of right now, it would be safe to assume that it's going to be all in the general fund. But as their efforts for us unfold over the next year, if they're successful in getting project funding that benefits the water utility, sewer utility, electric utility, or more, we would then look to take that cost of theirs and allocate it out to the funds that are benefiting from their services as well. But at this point, we assume it's just in the general fund.
With a fee of $80,000 to $100,000, what, so to speak, justified the spend? And what's your return? So I'm going to spend $80,000 to $100,000. Do we consider it success if they bring $10 million to our community? What's the benchmark of success?
Yeah, so at this point, I think what they're working on, so it's not just Kinney Corridor. it's also the fire station project, which I realize is kind of out of the scope of this group. But so far, we believe they've secured about $1.4 million for that. And so, that alone is largely the result of efforts of theirs, guidance they've provided that, we lacked kind of the staff workload capacity, and to some degree, even the expertise here at the local level, to be able to successfully solicit from the federal level. So what that currently looks like is, rather than coming to us in the form of a grant, it's going to be more in the form of a direct federal appropriation. And that's something that I suspect we would have been highly unlikely to have been successful in getting just from a staff perspective. So that alone, I think for us, feels like they probably to some degree mission accomplished. And then we'll see what else this relationship produces.
Thank you.
Just a couple other buckets that they're working on with Community Development Group. We put in a grant for economic development. I think that was around $75,000 to potentially bring staff to assist and kind of beef up. They are also looking at a couple different programs for transportation specific, roads, bridges, that kind of piece as well. So, okay, I'll turn it over to Steve.
Thank you, Amy.
Good evening, gentlemen. I'm Steve Goff, and I am the incoming president now of KCC. Judy Babcock's term expired. She remains as vice president and our vital organizational force, quite frankly. But we have, I've been the liaison between KCC and the city now for several months. Amy and I meet at least on a monthly basis, and I think we have developed just a great working relationship. So information can flow to the city through her, from me, and vice versa. The best news I can report is that KCC has got all of the funding for our share of the feasibility study, every penny of it. It's available, and I did make a point of last week at the Army Corps get-together. I said, look, does the city or KCC owe any money at this point? When are you going to send us a bill? He said, you've paid your initial money. We're still working on that. You'll get a bill from us, and it will be apportioned at that point between the city and KCC. But we're ready to perform, and I was very clear with him. I didn't want to have us, holding anything back here. So that's good news. Our donor teams and grantor and grant teams remain in full working relationships with various organizations. We need a project, though, to focus on to get these grants. You got to have a project, you got to have a timeline, you got to have a budget, and it's got to fit what the grantor's grant is all about. So it's what can we do right now to try to obtain some grants for something in the corridor plan. I was so thankful that Amy, Kevin, and Scott invited me to the meeting last week. It was wonderfully eye-opening as to exactly what the Corps is going to be doing in this feasibility study. And I asked them, we have been asked by the city, hey, why don't you go ahead with this access plan? That's going to be needed if one of those alternatives is shown. And they were very clear, you can't put anything in stone now because you don't know what you're going to do. We haven't defined the limits of a restoration area. We're not even sure what amenities you would be allowed to put in these areas. But they said we would certainly welcome if you would develop a concept or a preliminary plan for us to look at, during our feasibility study. So Duke Welter, Marty Kreitzman, and I met last Friday. I'm in touch with a firm out of Des Moines, Iowa that Amy put me in touch with, who has developed river access plans in the Midwest. Duke Welter knows a guy in Baraboo that he's talking to about that. And our next board meeting is August 28th, and I'm hoping to have some plan for the Kinney Corridor Group to develop some type of preliminary or conceptual access plan that we would then give to the city and to the Corps. As I said, our next board meeting is the 28th. We also have on August 22nd a meeting set up with the board members of the KLRT. They approached us and said, why don't we get together and talk about our respective positions and what donors we're seeking and try to work together on these fundraising efforts. And we thought that was a great idea. So we're going to get together and brainstorm and make sure that we can work together on this corridor plan. So I'm looking forward to that. But I would urge you all to visit our website. Somebody asked about the temperature. We have water monitoring results in there. We're doing that consistently still. Visit the website. Go to Kinney CC on YouTube. One thing that the Corps found helpful, the KCC, David Babcock in particular, had taken his drone and had aerial drone coverage all around the affected area, and the Army Corps found that very helpful. So I would urge y'all to take a look at that. But at any rate, we're together, we're working, and optimistic. Thanks. Unless you got a question.
Are you going after grants or donors? Like
Both.
okay.
But grants, grants primarily, and we've got a bunch of them that we're looking at. But as I said, you've got to have, here's our project, here's the timeline, here's the budget, and here's why it fits your grant. And until we're all anxiously awaiting the feasibility study and what the city wants to do with it. But both, and that's what we're going to try to coordinate too with the KLRT.
Gotcha. And preliminary looking at it, if all of the grants were to come through, fingers crossed, about how much would that be right now?
That's a good question. I cannot answer that question, but I'll certainly get you an answer. I'm still learning some of the names of the members at this point. I can tell you it's an awfully talented group, though. It really is.
I think a lot of us are counting on this group.
Yep. We know that.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you, Steve.
Take this down.
I thought you're coming up for an encore.
Not unless you want me to. Good.
Thank you so much. Good update.
Finance reports?
Yeah, well, we have Josh Solinger here tonight, our finance director, who's going to go over our finance report and give a brief update. Josh, thanks for coming tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Kevin. So I will just start with the electric utility and do revenues and expenses and then progress through the rest of the utility. So for the month of June 2023, year-to-date revenues for the electric utility totaled $7.7 million. Expenses were a little less than $7.1 million for net revenues over expenses of $686,000. For the water utility, year-to-date revenues are $1.1 million, and year-to-date expenses are a little over $1 million. So the net revenue over expenses for the water utility is almost $125,000.
Hey, Josh.
Yeah.
On that one, I guess I'm sorry. I didn't mean to throw you off the roll there.
Yeah, no.
I was expecting that number to be a lot higher, thinking everybody was watering their lawns and their gardens and all of the things, especially since, it's down from where it was at this time last year. And so I was just wondering if there was something that was being seen that we didn't see in this.
Yeah, and I'm just digging into the detail of it, frankly. I mean, it's from a total revenue perspective, we're tracking fairly closely to last year's expense. On the expense side, we're tracking within $4,000 of where we were last year. The other financing revenue source is one that I'd like to spend a little bit more time digging into if you're interested in more detailed answer, because there is about a $200,000 variance there, and so I can certainly investigate what that is.
I don't know. I just thought it would be higher. I know that I've been watering stuff like.
Well, your
crazy, but
hunches
I
are
don't
right.
know.
I know there was one day we pumped 700,000 more gallons in one day.
Yeah.
Than we did last year at the same time.
So
Yeah, and charges for services are up.
And I know the city's also growing, so there's more people using water too. So
Yeah, I think
I'm not going to lose sleep over it. I just was surprised.
Yeah, no, I mean, charges for services, for example, where you would see those types of revenues being receipted. Year to date, this year, we're at $891,000. This time last year, we were at $838,000. So, um, certainly not like a dramatic increase necessarily, but certainly higher than last year. I really think when you're going down the list there, it's that other financing revenue source that's kind of if that were to be at roughly the same level it was a year ago, I think that bottom line revenue figure would be a lot higher overall. So that's one I would probably spend some time digging into if interested. Um, then moving on to wastewater. So year to date revenues are 2.06 million. Year to date expenses are 1.26 million, or net revenues over expenses of almost $800,000, 796,000. And then for the stormwater utility, year-to-date revenues are $324,000. So it's our smallest utility, the least amount of activity. So you're not going to see huge numbers there. Year-to-date expenses total $168,000 for net revenues over expenses of $155,000. So the good news is, year-to-date for all of our 4 utilities, we do have net revenues over expenses for all of them. Just a reminder, if you're looking at the balance sheet reports, primarily not so much for our electric utility, but water and wastewater, the cash and investments look pretty large there still for those utilities as of June. And just as a reminder there, that's because we do still have bond proceeds that we're holding on to for the North Water Tower and North Loop projects. North Water Tower, as everybody can tell, north side of the community, that's up. I know they're in the process of doing all the painting and sandblasting and all that good stuff. So I would expect to see, at least in the water utility, that cash and investments numbers start to come down as those bond proceeds are getting spent, like now. The wastewater utility, I did check with our city engineer late last week, and we're a little under halfway through the project there. So we do have about $1 million in invoices paid out. I don't think you would see those reflected in the June report. You'll probably see those reflected in the July. And then I believe we've got about $1.5 million left for the wastewater utility, their share of the North Loop project that you'd see paid out in future invoices as well. So we're working our way through those bond proceeds slowly but surely as the projects get completed. And Kevin had asked me to come to, in addition to just providing the financial statements, just a kind of a heads up, an FYI, that a while ago I had talked about kind of capital projects that were coming up for our utilities. I think it was in the context of the biosolids work that we were going through. And I had mentioned that, and Trilogy Consulting, when we had them come, they had kind of talked about the same thing too, about wanting to take a look at the next 5 years for each of our utilities, the 3 major utilities being electric, water, and sewer, and just starting to develop a sense of where those utilities are heading financially, when we might be looking at requiring rate increases. That work is now underway. So we refer to those as our cost of service studies. So WPPI has performed, they're in the process of wrapping up our 5-year cost of service study. And what that's essentially going to tell us is, here was your most recent rate of return that you achieved. Here's where we see you going over the next 5 years. And when I say rate of return, what I'm referring to there is essentially you look at the book value of all of your assets for the utility. So it's your assets less accumulated depreciation. And then there's a couple other accounting adjustments you make based on PSC rules that aren't very large though. So really, big picture is you look at the value of your assets, and then you look at how much net operating income you had as a percent of those assets. So it's going to end up being a small percent, like 2, 3, 4%. And essentially, you then look at benchmarks that the PSC is set for rate of return, whether you're below, right around, or above that number. And that will give us some indication of, over the next 5 years, when we look at our forecasted expenses, both operating and through our 5-year capital improvement plan, what do we think is going to happen to our rates? Where do we think those need to go? Are we okay? Do we need to raise them? Preliminarily, it would appear that our rate of return for the electric utility, so they did complete 1 year so far, and now they're working on the next 4. We haven't gotten that far with the water and sewer cost of service studies yet. We just held a kickoff meeting with Trilogy Consulting, who will be completing those for us. WPPI did complete 1 year so far of that study. What it suggests is, I think not that long ago, we've been authorized by the PSC for our electric utility at a 4.9% rate of return. So each year we're looking to have our net operating income be 4.9% of the total value of the utility's assets. Not too terribly long ago, that number had us at the high end of municipal electric utilities in the state. That has changed recently over the last 12 to 24 months. There have been about 20 utilities who've done rate cases with the PSC for their electric utilities, and the lowest of those 20 in terms of authorized rate of return was actually 4.9%, which is exactly where we are. So we used to be on the high end. Now we suddenly find ourselves on the low end of the 20 municipal electric utilities that recently did rate cases. The benchmark right now is about 6.2%. So that's not to suggest at this point that we're going to come back to you when the cost of service study is complete and say we need to go right up to that benchmark in terms of what we're going to request for a rate increase. It would suggest, though, that we are now behind kind of where that benchmark number is. And we do have some large costs for the electric utility. Out there is possibilities for Man Valley Corporate Park, depending on what type of development we get. Certainly, we would look for whatever that development is to be the type of development that would, over time, kind of pay its own way in terms of the infrastructure we have to put out there. But this is more of a heads up and FYI that thing I talked about like a year ago, we're now there. We're performing those studies. We have some preliminary insights into what we're looking at for the electric utility, and there will be more to come in the months ahead for you all.
Just for a little piece of context too, the last electric rate increase we had was approximately 3 years ago. It was Q3 of 2020. So it's about 3 years ago when we did the last rate increase. And it was about 4.5 years ago when we started that process. So,
and that is the most recent of our utilities that we have rate increase for. I think water and sewer go back as far as 2014.
yes, and I Josh and I have talked a little bit off record about this, and now it's going to be on record. But I always say the last time we did the electric increase, I said, "Gosh, it's been 10 years," and I said, "I'll never let that happen again. We should do it more frequently and have less large increases." And here we are at water, 2014, so we're coming up on 10 years again. So, but we did look at it along the way in defense of that statement, where we were going to do an expedited rate case that you can do quickly, but our rate of return was too high. The PSC would not allow an expedited rate case, so we felt like we were fine with our rates. So we did check them along the way, and they've been fine.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we do here, so I mean, I think you all know that I have worked for other municipalities that they don't have an electric utility, but certainly a PSC regulated water utility. And one of the things that we use here that I think has been a tool that helps this particular community avoid more frequent rate increases is the impact fees that get included on development. So when we issue occupancy permits, there's a series of impact fees we're collecting off of those. And those have historically brought in, $2 to $3 to even in more recent years, $400,000 of additional revenue for the utility. Now that is one-time development dependent revenue, but the PSC takes that into consideration when they look at whether you would even qualify for a rate increase. And that's historically been sort of a financial tool that this city has that I think has allowed us to kind of stave off those rate increases any more frequently than other cities like I'm familiar with are having to do them.
I think it's a good tool in a development conversation for a community when someone could argue, well, development's not paying its way. We have a system here where development does pay its way through impact fees.
And then aside from rate increases, we did increase just sort of like, not the service fee, I'm totally forgetting the official name for it, but just like basically a connection fee to the grid. I mean, we did that like last year or the year before, did we not?
The monthly?
Yeah.
Monthly fee, that was in 2020, so that was 3 years ago. That went with that.
With the rate increase.
Yes, uh-huh.
So that
yes.
was the two.
Yes, those two went together. So we went from $8 a month to 13 or 12.50 we're at now. Yeah. That was with that rate increase. We had this conversation with city council as well, and everybody could have swore it was last year and it was 3 years ago. It's funny how time flies. And then you're always thinking, was that pre-COVID or post-COVID? When was that? And actually too, so we had that rate was supposed to go into effect like March 1st of 2020. And because of COVID, we paused that for 6 months and then put it in effect in like September of 2020.
Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Really appreciate that.
Utility dashboards.
I have a couple things, maybe on the dashboard or off the dashboard. I have a list here. I had a couple questions that were served to me before the meeting, and I have some announcements. First, I just want happy announcements. We hired a fellow named Peter Lane as our new water employee. So Peter is here, and because this is such a great place to work, and you get 6 weeks of PTO day one, he was here for a week, and he's on PTO this week. But we knew that upon hiring him, so we can't give him too hard of a time, he said. But Dean wanted him in for a week, get him acclimated. He'll go take his vacation and he'll be back. So yeah, great place to work. We hired Tim Rixman internally. We interviewed 5 internal wastewater folks, and Tim Rixman is our new working lead for wastewater. So we're excited to have Tim Rixman in that spot as well. North Water Tower, as most of you noticed, if you're driving into town, the water tower is being sandblasted and getting ready for a coat on the outside fairly soon, and they're also working on the inside of that tower, coating that tower. So we hope to see that coated yet this fall, and city logo will be on that tower as you drive into town. So that's happening. North Loop, the water and sewer installation along Paulson Road is nearly complete. The contractor, I was out there today, you can notice they're laying down sand and gravel. They'll be putting a walking, biking path on top of our water sewer line all the way along Paulson Road, basically from this south of the police station out to the Radio Road interchange. So it'll be a real nice walking and biking path along Paulson Road. That's happening. Powell Avenue Bridge, this wasn't on the questions, but I'll give you an update on that. The Wisconsin Department of Transportation anticipates rehabilitation of the Powell Avenue Bridge to start in mid-August. So the existing concrete deck will be removed and replaced. The bridge will be closed during construction, which is expected to be completed in the fall of 23. So there'll be a few months where Powell Avenue will be out of commission as they replace the Powell Avenue Bridge. Dryer project, like you know, is about 60% completed in design. We went from like an $8.1 million project to, we were notified in the last meeting, to about an $8.5 million project. So they said the subcontractors are saying costs are up, and it was interesting because our consultant Strand and Associates kind of wore us down in that meeting. So about 2 hours and 30 minutes into it, and then we got to that one. And I was kind of wore down, and they knew we weren't happy, and they were a little sheepish coming to us because I talked to Strand literally days before that meeting. I was assured that we were still good on costs, and they got some late information. So it's up a little bit. I'm not surprised. I mean, we're in that environment, and we're going to be going out to bid in November, and I'm just going to keep my expectations low now to think that we're still going to be at $8.5 million, 6 months from now. I surely hope so. I hope they're under promising and over delivering, but we shall see. They feel confident in that number, but I've said that before. Man Valley, they just completed the contract with Haas and Sons. Contract was signed, and they'll be doing groundbreaking ceremony in mid-September to begin the water and sewer construction in Man Valley. So that's what I have for updates. Any questions about projects, comments, concerns? A lot of stuff going on. There is multifamily, single family, duplexes going up everywhere. About 5 different projects right now. From South Point out by Comforts of Home, where they did some blasting of rock today. I don't know if anybody lives down there, but they put a notification out to the neighborhood. They were going to be doing some actual blasting through the bedrock so they can get sewer in out there. So South Point, right behind Tattersall, there's a project going in. Oak Hill, out by the wastewater treatment plant, 120 some units. And then 2 big projects out by the Radio Road, 35 interchange also going. So 5 residential projects in town. That's quite a lot.
We've talked about this before, but with all these new projects coming online, does Wayne and Dean and that crew feel like they have the appropriate amount of staff to make sure that everything's being taken care of? I mean, I just remember the guys crushing it when we had our big snowstorm.
Yeah.
And they got everything right back up and running within a few hours, it seemed like. I know it was probably longer than that.
No, but it was pretty fast.
I mean, we need to make sure that with all the new stuff coming in, that they have enough people and they're not stretched. And we're
Correct.
not crushing
Correct.
them.
We have those conversations with them regularly. I know we're going to be pulling cable in on Winter Street, the 3-phase circuits, the conduits in the ground, and we will have contractors doing much of that cable pulling work, and our folks will be doing terminations on that. So
Yeah.
there are times, and it's interesting because of the pride of our electric crew and water crews. You know, we talk about contracting work, and we're busy, we're stressed, and then we talk about contractors, and they're like, we could probably handle that. You know,
Right.
it's just the
It's
human
mainly
nature.
the
human-
after part, though, that they
Right.
have to maintain it and keep
Yes.
it connected and working. So
Yeah, like police, right? I mean, more roads, more vehicle miles traveled, it's more work.
that's
and-
somebody else's worry. I'm only caring.
Right.
Somebody
but
else's problem.
Right, but to your point, yeah, okay, you add in 800 services.
Right. It's a lot.
That's a lot for the same amount of people
Yeah.
maintaining that. Yeah, that's what Gordon Young says. Hey, you need another officer. You just put in another, 9.3 miles of lane. I have to,
Yeah.
monitor. So to your point, we keep an eye on that. We are running lean. We have a good, efficient crew, but I appreciate your point about burnout and overcommitting, and we're keeping an eye on that. They seem like they're okay today, but I just know they're proud and they're not going to say a lot until maybe you get too stressed out. So,
Okay.
But no, we're keeping an eye on it. I appreciate that.
Okay.
That's really all I. Let me see what else I have. Oh, fun stuff. I'm going right to the utility report. I jumped ahead of you.
You're good.
Okay, just kind of go together anyway. Dashboard, utility report. I think Lene put the Great River Falls Picnic. Look at this, the Great River Falls Picnic. Isn't that pretty? So anyway, it's our customer appreciation picnic that we usually get between 1,000 and 1,200 people at every year. That's August 17th this year. There's also a sign-up sheet going around. I know this picture has corn on it, and Kellen has been the server of corn several times, and he's the grand champion corn server. And we'd love to have you folks sign up again to help out on the 17th if you'd like to volunteer an hour or two at the Great River Falls Picnic, as we invite all of our boards and commissions.
I'll sign up tonight.
I like it. So see Lene, because she has a sign-up sheet ready to go. Ready to go. That's a Thursday night, 4 to 6 o'clock. It's free to the community. We have music and food and ice cream. It's
And
fun.
hopefully no rain this year.
Hopefully no rain this year. It rained at 5 minutes to 6 last year, and the skies opened up. So most people got served, but everybody picking up got soaked. So
It was memorable.
it was memorable. It was memorable. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Everybody else good? Appreciate everything you guys do and staying in tune and your interest. Hopefully the KCC and the U.S. Army Corps update was helpful tonight. Keep asking questions.
Okay.
But thank you, Jake, for coming up from Sun Prairie. And Jenna, thank you for being here tonight as well. What's that? Have you not met Jenna? Come on up, Jenna. Jenna is our WPPI rep. Now that you have the microphone, you have to say something. So Jenna, she works here half the week and in New Richmond half the week. So essentially.
Yep.
Yeah. So go ahead. Why don't you tell the folks how long you've been here and kind of what you keep an eye on?
Officially over a year now.
Now you're on the spot.
I know. I came from actually an education background, so I was a teacher for 12 years, transitioned to this position, and have really enjoyed it. Love the community connection, love working with people, working with members of the utility. The programs and services are a lot of fun, but it helps that I work with great people every day. You've got a lot of great staff on utility, so it's been excellent.
I appreciate everything Jenna does. She works with our large customers, customers who are changing rate classes. That's probably the least fun job of any job unless they're going to a rate class that helps them out. But every month we get a report from WPPI that says, hey, these 8 customers, because of the usage patterns, are now qualifying for a rate class up or a rate class down. And Jenna has to go communicate with those folks to let them know what's going on. So not an overly fun job most of the time if it's going in the wrong direction.
They're
but,
good to talk to.
yeah,
Just
good.
making sure they understand why. And usually it's, I mean, if they're increasing energy, sometimes that's a good thing because it means they're producing more, doing more things. So, but sometimes there's a cost to that. But everybody's been good to talk to, even when it is a tough conversation.
Yeah.
So.
And Jenna's real proactive with new construction design assistance, getting folks hooked up with Focus on Energy and getting those plans done for new construction, energy efficient design and things along those lines. So appreciate everything you do. You've been a real asset to our
Glad to be here.
organization. Thanks.
All right. Looking for a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Meeting is adjourned. Thanks. Next time, Dean. Next time, Dean.